Kofi inherited his father's small farm on a bright morning when the sun seemed to promise endless possibilities. The land was not large, but it was rich and fertile, nestled between two gentle hills where the soil had been worked by his family for generations. When his father passed away, Kofi felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He stood in the middle of the fields, looking at the rows of crops swaying in the breeze, and made a promise to himself that day, a promise that would change everything. He decided that he would not simply maintain his father's farm. No, Kofi wanted more. He wanted to become the wealthiest man in the entire village, someone whose name would be spoken with respect and envy. He imagined himself owning the largest farm, building a grand house, and having so much grain stored in his barns that people would come from distant places to trade with him. This dream consumed him completely. It filled his thoughts when he woke and followed him into his dreams at night. His wife Amma noticed the change in her husband slowly at first. When they married 5 years before his father's death, Kofi had been a gentle man who loved to laugh and spend time with his family. He would sit with Amma in the evenings and talk about their children, the sons and daughters they hoped to have someday. He would help her with household tasks and always made time to rest on the sacred days when the village gathered to honor the ancestors. But after inheriting the farm, something shifted inside him. Kofi began waking before the sun rose. Amma would find his side of their bed cold, knowing he had slipped away in the darkness to reach the fields. He would work all day under the hot sun, his clothes soaked with sweat, his hands becoming rough and cracked from constant labor. When evening came and the other farmers returned home to their families, Kofi would continue working, pushing himself harder and harder. The setting sun seemed only to mark the beginning of his evening work rather than the end of his day. Amma tried to support his ambitions at first. She prepared extra food for him to take to the fields and wove cloths to protect his skin from the sun. But as the weeks turned into months, her concern grew deeper. She noticed that Kofi was becoming thinner, that dark circles appeared under his eyes, and that his hands shook slightly when he held things. More than anything, she noticed that the light in his eyes, the warmth and kindness that had made her fall in love with him, was fading like a dying fire. One evening, as the stars began to appear in the sky, Amma waited for Kofi at the entrance to their fields. She had prepared his favorite meal, the one his mother had taught her to make before she died. She held the warm bowl in her hands, hoping that the familiar smell and taste might remind him of who he used to be. When Kofi finally emerged from the darkness, covered in mud and dust, she approached him carefully. "My husband," she said softly, "please come inside. The food is warm and the children are asking for their father. Tomorrow is a sacred day, a day when we should rest and give thanks to our ancestors. Even the earth itself needs time to rest. Please, I am begging you, come inside and be with us." Kofi looked at his wife, but it was as if he was seeing her from very far away. His mind was still in the fields, calculating how much more land he could clear, how many more crops he could plant, how many more months of work he needed before he could call himself wealthy. He gently pushed past her and shook his head. "Amma, you do not understand," he said, his voice hollow and distant. "I must work now. Tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. Every moment I rest is a moment I fall behind. Every hour I am not working is an hour someone else is getting richer than me. Our ancestors rested because they did not have the drive that I have. They were content with what they had, but I will not be content. I will be the wealthiest man in this village and nothing will stop me." Amma's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and touched his arm, feeling how thin he had become. "But at what cost, my husband? What good is all the wealth in the world if you lose your health? What good is having everything if you have no one to share it with? I miss you, Kofi. Our children miss you. Please, just one day. Rest for just one day." But Kofi pulled away from her touch and turned back toward the fields. "Not today, Amma. Not today. Maybe tomorrow or the day after. But not today. Today I must work." Night after night, this scene repeated itself. Amma would wait for him with food and love, and night after night, he would turn away and return to his fields. She began to feel like a ghost in her own home, watching her husband disappear into an obsession that grew stronger with each passing day. The sacred rest days that the village observed came and went, but Kofi continued to work through them all. The other villagers began to notice too. They would see Kofi in his fields at hours when no other man was working. Some said they had seen him there even in the middle of the night, moving through the darkness as if pulled by invisible chains. The village elder, a wise woman who had watched over the community for many decades, observed Kofi from a distance and felt a deep concern settle in her heart. One morning, the elder approached Kofi as he prepared to begin another day of work. She was an old woman, bent with age but still strong in spirit, and when she spoke, people listened. "Kofi," she said gently, "I knew your father well. He was a good man and a good farmer, but he also knew when to stop. He understood that the earth has its own rhythm, and we must respect that rhythm if we wish to live long and peaceful lives. Your ambition is like a fire that grows hotter each day, and I fear it will burn you from the inside out." Kofi listened politely but did not truly hear her words. "Thank you, elder," he said, "but I must work now. Perhaps we can talk another time." And with that, he returned to his fields, leaving the elder shaking her head with worry. As the seasons changed and months passed, the whispers in the village grew louder. People began to say that Kofi had angered the spirits of the land, that something unnatural was happening in his fields. The crops grew strangely, too fast, too tall, but when people tasted them they were bitter and wrong. Animals avoided his land, and no birds would nest in his trees. But Kofi did not care about these warnings. He only cared about working, always working, driven by a hunger that no amount of success could satisfy. Amma stood at the window of their home each evening and watched her husband disappear into the darkness of his fields, and she wept for the man she had married and the life they were supposed to share together. The first sign came during the harvest season, when all the other farmers in the village were celebrating the bounty that the earth had provided. Kofi's crops grew taller and faster than anyone had ever seen before, which at first seemed like a blessing. The stalks reached toward the sky with an almost desperate hunger, as if they were trying to escape from the ground itself. People came from neighboring villages to marvel at how productive Kofi's land had become. They congratulated him on his hard work and asked him to share the secret of his success. But there was something deeply wrong with these crops that no one wanted to admit at first. When the time came to harvest, the grain that fell from Kofi's fields was twisted and discolored. Instead of the golden yellow that healthy grain should be, it had a sickly pale color with streaks of brown running through it. More disturbing still was the taste. The women of the village who tried to grind the grain into flour found that it was bitter, so bitter that no amount of honey or spices could make it pleasant to eat. The bread made from this flour had a strange taste that made people's mouths feel dry and uncomfortable. Children refused to eat it, and even the hungry had to force it down. One morning, a farmer named Kwame came to visit Kofi's land out of curiosity. He was an old man who had farmed the same plot of land for 50 years and was known for his knowledge of the soil and the seasons. He walked through Kofi's fields with a troubled expression on his face, running his fingers through the earth and examining the plants closely. When he emerged from the fields, he sought out Amma, who was sitting outside their house preparing vegetables for the evening meal. "Your husband has done something to this land," Kwame said, his voice serious and quiet. "I do not know what it is exactly, but I can feel it. The earth itself is sick. When I touched the soil it felt wrong, too hot, too dry, even though it has been watered regularly. The spirits of this place are angry. I have farmed for many years and I have never seen anything like this. You must convince your husband to stop what he is doing before it is too late." Amma's hands trembled as she listened to Kwame's words. That night, she waited for Kofi to come home from the fields, and when he finally arrived well after dark, she took his hands in hers and begged him to listen to what the old farmer had said. But Kofi was tired and irritable, and he dismissed her concerns with an impatient wave of his hand. "Kwame is just an old man who does not understand modern farming," Kofi said coldly. "The earth is not sick. The crops are strong. That is all that matters. Now please, I need to rest for a few hours before I must return to work." But something strange was happening to Kofi's body. Even though he claimed he needed to rest, sleep would not come to him. He would lie in bed next to Amma, his eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. His hands would twitch and move as if he were still working the fields even while lying down. Sometimes Amma would find him sleepwalking, moving through their home with his arms extended as if he were plowing an invisible field. It terrified her to see her husband like this, caught between sleep and waking, trapped in a world only he could see. One night, Amma woke to find Kofi's side of the bed empty. She got up and searched for him, finding him in the back courtyard, standing in his work clothes even though it was the middle of the night. His eyes were open but unseeing, and he was making the same repetitive motions he made while working in the fields, reaching, pulling, turning, over and over again. Amma called his name but he did not respond. She touched his shoulder and felt him tremble beneath her hand. "Kofi, my husband, please come back to bed," she whispered, her voice breaking with fear and sadness. For a moment, Kofi seemed to recognize her. His eyes focused slightly, and he looked at her with an expression of confusion and pain. But then his gaze drifted away again, and he returned to his strange repetitive movements, as if she was not there at all. The animals began to avoid Kofi's land completely. The birds that had once nested in the trees stopped coming. Dogs that passed near the fields would whimper and pull away, refusing to go any closer. Even the insects seemed to have abandoned the place. The only creatures that remained were strange ones. Unusual insects with colors that seemed unnatural, spiders that grew larger than normal, and at night, sounds that no one could identify. The village began to speak of curses and angry spirits. One afternoon, a group of children playing near the edge of Kofi's fields suddenly ran away screaming. They said they had seen shadows moving between the crops, shadows that did not belong to any person or animal they knew. Their mothers held them close and warned their other children to stay far away from those lands. Word spread quickly through the village, and soon everyone was talking about the curse on Kofi's farm. Amma heard all these stories and felt her heart break a little more each day. She knew her husband was not a bad man. He was not someone who had done anything intentionally wrong. But something had taken hold of him, something that was consuming him from the inside out. She could see it happening and could do nothing to stop it. It was like watching someone drown and being unable to reach them. She began to go to the fields with him, trying to stay close, hoping that her presence might somehow bring him back to himself. She would stand at the edge of the crops and watch him work, her eyes filled with tears. Sometimes she would approach him and hold his trembling hand, feeling how thin it had become, how the bones seemed to push against the skin. She would look into his eyes and see a stranger looking back at her, a man who looked like her husband but was no longer truly him. "Please, Kofi," she would beg, holding his hand to her chest. "Please, my love, we must go to the elder. Something is very wrong. You are not well. Your body is breaking down and your mind is somewhere far away from me. I am losing you and I do not know how to save you. Please just come with me. Let the elder help us. Let me help you." But Kofi would pull his hand away gently and shake his head. "I cannot stop, Amma," he would say, his voice hollow and distant. "I do not know why, but I cannot stop. There is something inside me that will not let me rest. Every moment I think about stopping, I feel this pressure in my chest that grows and grows until I have no choice but to return to the work. It is as if something else is controlling my body, and I am just a passenger watching from far away." The worst part was that Kofi seemed aware of what was happening to him but helpless to stop it. He would look at his wife with eyes full of desperation and sadness, as if he was calling out to her from behind a thick glass wall that she could not break through. Amma would hold him and cry, feeling the tremors in his body, feeling the rapid beating of his heart, knowing that the man she loved was slipping away from her with each passing day. The village elder watched all of this with growing concern. She had lived for many decades and had seen many things, but she had never witnessed someone so completely consumed by their own ambition. She began to prepare special herbs and remedies, hoping that there might be a way to help Kofi before it was too late. But deep in her heart, she knew that the most powerful curse is the one we create ourselves, and only the person who is cursed can choose to break free from it. The night came that changed everything, though neither Kofi nor Amma knew it at the time. It was a night when the moon hung full and bright in the sky, casting silver light across the village and making everything visible even in the darkness. It was the kind of night that the old people said was special, a night when the barrier between the world of the living and the world of the spirits grew thin. Amma could not sleep as had become her habit. She lay in their bed, listening to the sounds of the village at night, the crickets singing their endless song, the wind moving through the trees, the distant call of night birds. But there was another sound too, one that had become all too familiar. It was the sound of Kofi working, the rhythmic thud of his tools striking the earth, over and over, never stopping, never resting. She had learned to recognize this sound even in her sleep, and it filled her with a deep sadness every time she heard it. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Amma rose from their bed and wrapped a cloth around her shoulders. She walked out into the moonlit night, following the sound of her husband's work. The path to the fields was familiar now, worn smooth by her many nightly journeys. As she walked, she thought about the man Kofi used to be, the man who would hold her hand and talk about their future, the man who laughed easily and loved freely. That man seemed like a memory from another lifetime now. When Amma reached the fields, what she saw made her stop in her tracks and stare in absolute horror. The moonlight illuminated something that was no longer quite human. Kofi was moving with a speed and a power that no normal person possessed. His arms rose and fell in perfect rhythm, working the earth with such force that she could hear the sound of it even from a distance. But it was his eyes that terrified her the most. They were wide open, staring straight ahead at nothing, glazed over like the eyes of someone who was not truly awake. His skin, visible where his shirt had torn from all the work, was pale and ghostly in the moonlight. His body had become skeletal, just bones and skin stretched thin. Yet he continued to move with this impossible, inhuman speed, as if his body had become a machine that no longer needed rest or food or water. Sweat poured from him and his breath came in harsh, ragged gasps, but he did not slow down. If anything, he seemed to be working faster, driven by something beyond reason or will. Amma watched for only a moment before understanding flooded through her with terrible clarity. This was not her husband anymore. Or rather, it was her husband, but something else had taken over, something that was using his body and his strength for its own purposes. She thought of all the warnings from the village elder, of Kwame's words about the spirits, of all the strange things that had happened since Kofi began his endless work. Now she understood. Her husband had not simply made a choice to work too hard. Something darker, something spiritual had taken hold of him. She ran toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Kofi," she cried out. "Kofi, stop. Please stop." He did not acknowledge her. He did not even seem to see her as she approached. His arms continued their terrible rhythmic motion, and his eyes stared straight ahead into nothing. Amma reached him and grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away from his work, but his strength was overwhelming. She was thrown backward by the force of his movement. Desperate now, driven by a fear and a love that was stronger than anything else inside her, Amma did the only thing she could think of. She positioned herself directly between Kofi and the field. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, her arms spread wide, blocking his path. If he continued to work, he would have to go through her. He would have to push her aside or knock her down. And perhaps that would be enough to break whatever spell had taken hold of him. "Kofi," she screamed, her voice raw with emotion. "Look at me. Look at what you have become. Look at what you are doing." For several long moments nothing changed. Kofi's arms continued to move, but now they were moving toward her. Amma stood firm, even though every instinct inside her told her to run. She stood there and let her husband see her, let him see the destruction that his ambition had caused. And then, slowly, something shifted. Kofi's pace began to slow. His arms, which had been moving with that terrible inhuman speed, began to move more slowly. The glaze in his eyes flickered, like a candle flame struggling against the wind. For just a moment, clarity returned to his gaze, and he truly saw his wife for the first time in months. What he saw broke him. He saw a woman who had once been beautiful and full of joy, now thin and worn down by worry and sadness. He saw a woman whose eyes were red from crying, whose face bore the lines of months of anguish. He saw a woman who loved him so much that she would stand between him and the very thing that had consumed him, even though it meant putting herself in danger. And in that moment, Kofi understood the true cost of his ambition. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His hands fell to his sides. His breathing, which had been harsh and rapid, began to slow. He looked down at his skeletal arms, at his torn and dirty clothes, at the earth still clinging to his skin. He looked around at the twisted crops growing in his fields, at the strange and unnatural darkness that seemed to cling to this place. And then he looked back at his wife. "Amma?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken as if he had not spoken in months. In a way he had not. The man that had been speaking, moving, working had not truly been Kofi at all. Amma threw her arms around him and they both fell to the ground. She held him close and her tears began to flow freely. Kofi's entire body was shaking, whether from cold or emotion or the breaking of whatever spell had held him, she did not know. But she held him and did not let go. "I am so sorry," Kofi kept repeating over and over, his voice filled with despair and remorse. "I am so sorry, Amma. I'm so sorry. I do not know what happened to me. I do not know who I became. Forgive me. Please forgive me." They knelt together in the middle of the field, husband and wife, with the moonlight shining down on them. And in that moment, something shifted in the spiritual world as well. The darkness that had clung to the fields began to lift slightly, like a weight that had been partially removed. The curse that Kofi had created through his own refusal to stop, through his own obsession and ambition, had finally met its match in the power of love and the willingness to truly see another person's pain. But the breaking was not yet complete. Kofi had seen his wife suffering, but he had not yet truly broken free from the force that had driven him for so long. That would require something more. It would require him to face the deepest parts of himself, to understand why he had been willing to sacrifice everything for wealth and status. It would require him to choose, truly choose, to stop. And that choice was still to come. The morning after that terrible night in the fields, Kofi did not wake up. Or rather, he woke up but he could not move. His body was completely exhausted, drained of every last bit of strength. He lay in their bed, unable to lift his head, unable to do anything but breathe. Amma sat beside him, holding his hand, watching his face carefully for any sign of the man she had married so long ago. Kofi's eyes were open, but they were filled with tears that ran silently down his cheeks. He did not speak. He simply lay there and the tears continued to flow. It was as if all the emotions that he had been pushing down, all the pain and the fear and the desperate hunger that had driven him for so many months, were finally being released. His body shook with silent sobs, and Amma held his hand and waited for him to be ready to speak. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, and the light in their room changed from golden morning light to bright afternoon brightness. Still Kofi did not speak. He simply wept, his tears soaking into the cloth that covered their bed. Amma brought him water and he drank it slowly. She brought him broth and he managed to eat a few spoonfuls. But mostly he lay there and allowed himself to feel everything that he had been running from. As the sun began to set, there was a soft knock on their door. Amma opened it to find the village elder standing there, leaning on her walking stick, her ancient face etched with concern and wisdom. Without saying anything, the elder walked into their home and approached the bed where Kofi lay. She looked down at him for a long moment, studying his face with eyes that had seen many years and many sorrows. "May I sit?" the elder asked, her voice soft and gentle. Amma nodded and brought a stool for the old woman. The elder sat down carefully, settling her old bones with a slight groan. She was quiet for a long time, simply sitting beside Kofi's bed, not speaking. Finally she began to talk, her voice carrying the weight of many years of wisdom. "Your father," the elder said, speaking to Kofi, "came to me once when you were just a small boy. He was worried about you. He said that you had a fire inside you, a fire that burned brighter and hotter than it should. He asked me what he could do to help you. I told him that you would have to learn this lesson yourself in your own time. I am sorry now that I did not speak to you directly when I was younger, but perhaps the time was not right then. Perhaps you had to walk this path in order to understand." Kofi's tears began to flow even more heavily as he listened to the elder speak about his father. "What I want to tell you now," the elder continued, "is something that many people never understand even in their whole lives. The curse that has taken hold of you, the thing that made your body move when you did not wish it to move, the darkness that grew in your fields, this curse did not come from outside of you, Kofi. It came from inside you. It was born from your own refusal to rest, from your own belief that you were not enough as you are." Kofi's eyes moved to look at the elder's face. She had his full attention now. "You see," the elder said, "when we refuse to accept ourselves as we are, when we tell ourselves that we need more and more and more before we can be happy, before we can be worthy, we create a hunger that can never be satisfied. This hunger becomes like a living thing inside us. It grows stronger the more we feed it with our work and our striving. And eventually, if we do not stop it, it takes control of us completely. This is what happened to you, Kofi." The elder paused and adjusted her position on the stool. Her old knees creaked with the movement, and she winced slightly with pain. But she continued speaking, her voice steady and strong despite her physical weakness. "But here is the other part of this story," she said. "The curse can only be broken from the inside by the person who created it. No amount of magic or herbs or prayers from others can break it. Only you can break it, Kofi. Only you can choose to stop. Only you can choose to believe that you are enough." Kofi's body began to shake more intensely. His breathing became faster and more ragged. Amma reached out and took his other hand, squeezing it gently to let him know she was there. "I do not know how," Kofi whispered, his voice barely audible. "I do not know how to stop wanting more. I do not know how to believe that I am enough. My whole life I have been told that I must work harder, achieve more, have more. My father told me this. The village told me this. I told myself this. How do I stop believing something that I have believed for my entire life?" The elder leaned forward, and her ancient eyes looked directly into Kofi's eyes. "You stop by choosing to," she said simply. "You stop by saying the words even if you do not fully believe them yet. You stop by accepting that you are worthy of rest, worthy of love, worthy of peace, not because of what you have or what you have achieved but simply because you exist. Because you are human. Because you are alive. That is enough." Kofi closed his eyes. He lay very still, and Amma could see his lips moving silently, as if he was practicing words that he did not yet have the courage to speak aloud. The elder continued to sit beside him, patient and silent, waiting for him to find the strength within himself to speak the words that would free him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, Kofi opened his mouth and spoke. His voice was weak and trembling, barely more than a whisper, but the words came out. "I am enough," he said. "I am enough as I am. My worth is not measured by what I own or what I have built or how much work I have done. My worth comes from being human, from being alive, from being a husband to Amma and a son to my father's memory. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough." As he spoke these words, something shifted in the room. It was not something that could be seen or heard in the normal way, but it was something that could be felt. The air seemed to become lighter. The darkness that had clung to the edges of the room seemed to lift. Kofi's body, which had been rigid with tension, began to relax. His tears continued to fall, but they were different now. Tears of release, tears of healing, tears of acceptance. The elder stood up slowly and placed her weathered hand on Kofi's forehead. She did not say anything more. She simply placed her hand there, a gesture of blessing and recognition. Then she turned to Amma and nodded slowly. "The breaking has begun," the elder said quietly. "The curse has lost its power over him. But the healing, the true healing, this will take time. He must learn to live differently. He must learn to rest without feeling guilty. He must learn to accept love without believing he must earn it. This will be harder than breaking the curse in many ways. But he has taken the first step, and that is what matters." Over the following days and weeks, Kofi began to recover. His body, which had been pushed far beyond its limits, slowly began to heal. He slept for long hours, deep and peaceful sleep, the kind of sleep he had not experienced in months. When he woke, Amma would be there beside him, holding his hand, reminding him that he was safe, that he was loved, that he was enough. And slowly, day by day, Kofi began to believe the words he had spoken. Not completely, not all at once, but gradually, like the light of dawn breaking through the darkness of night. "5 years had passed since that night when Kofi fell to his knees in the fields and Amma's love brought him back from the edge of darkness. 5 years of slow healing, of learning to live differently, of discovering what it meant to work with purpose rather than obsession. The farm that had once been twisted and bitter with curse now flourished with life and abundance in a way that was far more beautiful than any wealth could ever be. The fields were no longer unnaturally tall or strangely colored. Instead, the crops grew with a healthy, natural rhythm. The grain was golden and sweet, the vegetables were plump and nourishing, and the fruit trees that Kofi had planted in those early years of recovery bore fruit so delicious that people came from neighboring villages just to taste it. But more importantly, the land itself seemed alive again. Birds nested in the trees. Animals moved freely through the fields. Insects pollinated the flowers. The earth had returned to balance, and with that balance came genuine abundance. What made Kofi's farm different from all the others was not that it was the largest or produced the most. It was not that Kofi had become the wealthiest man in the region, though he was certainly comfortable and had enough to live well. What made his farm different was that everyone who came there could feel the peace that lived in that place. It was as if the curse that had once poisoned the land had been replaced by a blessing of contentment and harmony. Kofi and Amma rose each morning with the sun, but they also allowed themselves to rest when the sun set. They worked hard during the planting season and the growing season, but they observed the sacred rest days that their ancestors had honored. They celebrated the harvest with gratitude and joy, giving thanks to the earth for providing, to the rain for nourishing, to the sun for warming. They celebrated with their entire community, sharing the abundance with those who had less, understanding that true wealth meant having enough to share. The change in Kofi was visible to everyone who knew him. The haunted, desperate look had left his eyes. In its place was a calmness and a wisdom that seemed to come from having looked into the deepest darkness within himself and survived. His body had filled out again, no longer skeletal but strong and healthy. When he smiled, which he did often now, it was a genuine smile that came from a place of peace within him. But the most remarkable thing about Kofi was how he used his experience to help others. He became known throughout the region not as the wealthiest farmer, but as the wisest. Young people came from many villages to listen to him speak, to learn not just about farming but about life itself. He would sit beneath the great tree at the edge of his fields, the same tree where he and Amma now spent their evenings talking and watching the sunset, and he would tell his story to anyone who would listen. One day a young man named Ya came to Kofi's farm. Ya was ambitious and driven, much like Kofi had been many years before. He wanted to know the secret of Kofi's success, hoping to learn techniques that would help him build his own farm into something great. Kofi welcomed him and spent the day working alongside him, showing him how to prepare the soil, when to plant, how to know when the crops were ready to harvest. But at the end of the day, as the sun began to set, Kofi led Ya to sit beneath the great tree. He handed him a cup of water and some fruit, and then he began to speak. You want to know the secret of my farm? Kofi asked. I will tell you, but the secret is not what you think it is. The secret is not in techniques or in hard work or in dedication. The secret is in understanding that there is a rhythm to life, just as there is a rhythm to the seasons. If you try to force the crops to grow faster than they naturally want to grow, you damage them. If you work without rest, you damage yourself. The greatest wisdom is knowing when to push forward and when to stop, when to work and when to rest. Ya listened, but Kofi could see that he did not fully understand. So Kofi began to tell him his story, the whole story from the moment he had inherited his father's farm and become obsessed with wealth, through the months of terrible darkness when the curse had consumed him, to the night when Amma's love had broken the spell. He told Ya about the words he had finally been able to speak. I am enough. That is the real secret, Kofi said. Understanding that you are enough. Not because of what you own or what you have achieved, but because you are alive, because you are human, because you exist. When you understand this, you no longer need to chase more and more. You can be satisfied with what you have. You can rest without feeling guilty. You can love without trying to earn it. And when you live like this, true abundance comes to you not because you are chasing it, but because it comes naturally as a gift. Ya's eyes filled with tears as he listened. Something in Kofi's words touched something deep inside him, something that recognized the truth of what was being said. Over the years, more and more young people came to listen to Kofi's wisdom. Some came because they had heard his story and wanted to learn from it. Others came because they were caught in the same trap that Kofi had been caught in, the belief that they were not enough, that they needed to achieve more, have more, be more. Many of them found healing in his words and in his example. They learned that it was possible to be successful without being consumed by ambition. They learned that rest was not a sign of weakness but a sign of wisdom. They learned that the greatest wealth was knowing when to stop. The village itself began to change because of Kofi's influence. People started to take more time for their families. They celebrated the sacred days with more joy and less guilt about not working. The communal meals became richer and more joyful. Children had parents who were present and peaceful rather than stressed and distant. The entire community benefited from the healing that had taken place in one man's heart. Amma and Kofi had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and they raised them with the lessons that Kofi had learned so painfully. They taught their children to work hard but also to rest. They taught them that their worth was not dependent on what they achieved. They taught them that the greatest strength was in surrender, in accepting what is, in being grateful for what they had. These children grew up to be peaceful, balanced people who found joy in simple things. On one particular evening years later, when Kofi was no longer young but had entered the season of wisdom that comes with age, he and Amma sat beneath their tree as they had done countless times before. They watched the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The fields around them were golden with the approaching harvest. Everything was quiet and peaceful. Do you ever regret it? Amma asked, taking her husband's hand. Do you ever wish that you had pushed harder, achieved more, become the wealthiest man in the land like you once dreamed? Kofi was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. Then he smiled and squeezed Amma's hand gently. No, he said. No, I do not regret it. Yes, I suffered. Yes, I lost much during those dark years. But because I suffered, because I learned those lessons in such a painful way, I have been able to help so many others avoid the same suffering. I have been able to show people that there is another way to live. And I have you beside me and our children and peace in my heart. That is a wealth that no amount of gold or grain could ever equal. As they sat there together, watching the darkness fall gently over the land, the story of Kofi's curse and his healing lived on in the hearts and minds of all those who had heard it. The greatest lesson had been learned not through words alone, but through the lived example of a man who had been broken and had chosen to heal himself through love and humility and the willingness to stop.